I never thought a $500 weather station would land me in the middle of a legal nightmare. But here I am, sitting in a courthouse waiting room with my lawyer, while the HOA president tries to explain to a judge why she stole my property and caused an entire school district to shut down early. Let me back up a bit. My name is Garrison, and I moved to Maplewood Estates in suburban Denver, Colorado about 2 years ago. It seemed like the perfect neighborhood. The houses were nice, the streets were clean, and my wife Sarah was thrilled about the community pool. I work as a meteorologist for a local news station, so naturally, I'm obsessed with weather. One of the first things I did after moving in was set up a professional-grade weather station in my backyard. This wasn't some cheap plastic thing from a department store. I had anemometers, barometers, rain gauges, temperature sensors, and humidity monitors. The whole setup cost me nearly $3,000 when you factored in the mounting equipment and software. Everything was fine for the first 18 months. I'd wake up every morning, check my readings, and head to work with precise data about local conditions. My station was connected to Weather Underground and several other meteorological databases, contributing real-time data that helped forecasters like me make better predictions. The neighborhood kids thought it was cool, and a few parents even asked me to explain how it worked. I loved sharing my passion with people who showed genuine interest. Then, Brenda Kowalski got elected as HOA president. Brenda was exactly what you'd picture when someone says the word Karen. She was 47 years old with that distinctive angled bob haircut that somehow defied gravity and common sense. She wore pastel pantsuits to every HOA meeting and carried a 3-ring binder filled with printed emails, bylaws, and photographs of alleged neighborhood violations. Within her first week as president, she sent out a newsletter announcing her intention to restore the aesthetic integrity of Maplewood Estates. I should have known. I was in trouble when she showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for work when the doorbell rang. Sarah had already left for her job at the hospital, so I answered in my shirt and tie, still holding my coffee mug. "Good morning, Lucas," Brenda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have a moment to discuss your backyard situation?" "My backyard situation?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "The equipment," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the back of my house. "The poles and devices. They're quite visible from the street, and several neighbors have expressed concerns about the appearance." I felt my stomach drop. "You mean my weather station?" "I mean the collection of industrial-looking poles and sensors that are negatively impacting our neighborhood's curb appeal," Brenda corrected. "I've reviewed the HOA bylaws, and Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that no homeowner shall erect structures or installations that create visual blight or reduce property values." "Brenda, with all due respect, it's a weather station. It's in my backyard, not my front lawn. You can barely see it from the street. Nevertheless, it violates our community standards," she said firmly. "I'm going to need you to remove it within 30 days, or the HOA will be forced to take action." I spent the next week trying to fight this reasonably. I attended the monthly HOA meeting and presented my case to the board. I brought photographs showing that the weather station was barely visible from any public vantage point. I explained the scientific value of the data I was collecting. I even offered to paint the mounting poles to better match my fence. The board consisted of 5 people: Brenda, 2 of her friends who agreed with everything she said, and 2 reasonable people who seemed sympathetic but unwilling to oppose her. The vote was 3-2 against me. I had 30 days to dismantle my equipment or face daily fines of $50. I consulted with a real estate attorney named Richard Pemberton, who specialized in HOA disputes. He reviewed the bylaws and my situation carefully before delivering his opinion. "Technically, they have a case," Richard admitted. "The language about visual blight is vague enough that they could argue a weather station falls under that category. However, the equipment is in your backyard, and Colorado has some case law protecting homeowners' reasonable use of their property. We could fight this, but it would be expensive and time-consuming." "How expensive?" I asked. "Probably $15,000 to $20,000 in legal fees, and there's no guarantee we'd win." I went home that night feeling defeated. Sarah tried to comfort me, but she could see how much this bothered me. The weather station wasn't just a hobby. It was part of my professional identity and a genuine contribution to meteorological science. That's when I had an idea. If I couldn't keep the visible components, maybe I could relocate the most important sensors to places where they wouldn't be seen. I spent the next weekend moving my temperature and humidity sensors to the side of my house, tucked behind some bushes where they'd still get accurate readings, but wouldn't be visible from anywhere except my own property. I relocated my rain gauge to the roof, disguised among the shingles. The anemometer was trickier, but I managed to mount it on a pole that looked like a decorative garden feature from a distance. I kept the main display unit inside my house, and everything continued working perfectly. The data quality was just as good as before, and I'd technically complied with the HOA's demand to remove the visible weather station. I thought I'd found a clever compromise. For about 2 months, everything was quiet. Then, on a Monday morning in early June, I woke up to find my sensors missing. Not moved, not damaged, gone. I walked around my entire property in my pajamas, searching for any sign of the equipment. The temperature sensors that had been mounted on the side of my house were nowhere to be found. The humidity monitors had vanished. Even the rain gauge I'd installed on my roof had been removed. All that remained were the mounting brackets and some loose wires. I immediately called the police to report the theft. Officer Martinez showed up about 40 minutes later and took my statement. He walked around the property with me, photographing the mounting points and taking notes. "Any idea who might have taken them?" he asked. "I have a suspicion," I said carefully. "I've been in a dispute with my HOA about this equipment. The president demanded I remove it a few months ago." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an accusation. Do you have any proof she was involved?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but this seems like a pretty big coincidence." He filed the report and gave me a case number, but I could tell he thought this was going to be a dead end. Property theft without witnesses rarely got solved unless the stolen items turned up at a pawn shop or online marketplace. I was furious, but tried to stay calm. I sent Brenda a carefully worded email asking if she knew anything about my missing equipment. Her response came within an hour. "Dear Lucas, I have no knowledge of your missing property. However, I would remind you that the HOA board voted to require removal of your unauthorized installations. Perhaps this is simply the universe's way of resolving the matter. Best regards, Brenda." The casual cruelty of that email made my blood boil. I forwarded it to Officer Martinez and to my attorney. Richard read it and sighed. "It's suspicious, but not proof," he said. "She's careful not to admit anything. Unless we can prove she took the equipment or ordered someone else to take it, there's not much we can do." I decided to take matters into my own hands. I ordered replacement sensors, but this time I also installed a security camera system with 4 cameras covering my entire property. If someone came back to steal my equipment again, I'd have video evidence. The new sensors arrived within a week, and I spent a Saturday afternoon installing everything. This time, I made sure every installation point was visible to at least one camera. I even added some fake sensors as decoys, hoping that if someone tried to steal them again, they'd waste time on worthless props while my real equipment remained hidden. My weather station was back online, feeding data to my displays and to the various meteorological databases I contributed to. Everything seemed back to normal. 2 weeks later, I noticed something strange. The temperature readings from my backyard sensors were showing numbers that didn't match what I was seeing on other weather stations in the area. According to my equipment, it was 94 degrees in my backyard at 2 in the afternoon. But the station at Denver International Airport, just 12 miles away, was reading 81 degrees. The National Weather Service office in Boulder showed 82 degrees. I walked outside to check. It was warm, definitely in the low 80s, but nowhere near 94 degrees. I held up a handheld thermometer I kept in my garage. It read 83 degrees. Something was wrong with my sensors. I spent the next hour troubleshooting. I checked all the connections, rebooted the system, and even swapped out sensors to see if one was malfunctioning. That's when I made a disturbing discovery. The serial numbers on the temperature sensors didn't match the ones I'd ordered. These weren't my sensors. Someone had replaced my equipment with identical-looking sensors that were feeding false data. I immediately checked my security camera footage from the past 2 weeks. It took me 3 hours of reviewing recordings, but I finally found what I was looking for. 4 nights earlier, at 2:30 in the morning, a figure in dark clothing had entered my backyard. The video quality wasn't great because it was nighttime, but I could see the person systematically removing my sensors and replacing them with others. The person knew exactly where each sensor was located and worked quickly and efficiently. I couldn't see the person's face clearly, but I could tell it was a woman based on the build and movement. And in one brief moment when she turned toward the camera, the streetlight caught enough of her face for me to make a positive identification. Brenda Kowalski. I saved the footage and called Officer Martinez immediately. He came by that evening to review the video. "That's definitely her," he confirmed after watching the footage 3 times. "This is criminal trespassing and vandalism at minimum, possibly theft depending on whether she still has your original sensors." "What happens now?" I asked. "I'll write up a report and forward it to the district attorney's office. They'll decide whether to file charges. Given that you have clear video evidence, I'd say the chances are pretty good." "How long will that take?" "Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. The system moves slowly sometimes." I didn't have a few months to wait. The false sensors were feeding bad data into meteorological databases that real forecasters used. I needed to alert people about the corrupted data immediately. I spent that night contacting Weather Underground, the National Weather Service, and several other organizations that I'd been sharing data with. I explained the situation and asked them to disregard any data from my station until further notice. Most were understanding, though a few seemed skeptical about my story. The next morning, I got a call from my boss at the news station. "Lucas, what's going on with your personal weather station?" he asked. "I got a very strange call from someone claiming your equipment is spreading false information." "Who called you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A woman named Brenda Kowalski. She said she's your HOA president and that you've been using faulty equipment to manipulate weather reports." She seemed very concerned about public safety. I explained the entire situation to my boss, including the theft, the false sensors, and the video evidence. He listened carefully and then said something that surprised me. This could actually be a story. A local HOA president tampering with meteorological equipment and corrupting weather data. That's news, Lucas. Would you be willing to go on camera about this? I hesitated. Going public would escalate things significantly, but it might also put pressure on the district attorney to act faster. Let me think about it, I said. That afternoon, I got an email from the superintendent of the Jefferson County School District. They were one of the organizations that pulled weather data from various sources, including personal weather stations like mine, to help make decisions about school closures and early releases during severe weather events. The email was formal and concerning. Mr. Garrison, we have been made aware that your weather station may have been providing inaccurate data to our monitoring systems. Please confirm the accuracy of your equipment and provide documentation of recent calibration. Until we receive this confirmation, we will be removing your station from our data sources. I replied immediately, explaining the situation and providing copies of the police report and security footage. I urged them to verify all data against multiple sources and to be aware that someone had deliberately corrupted my station's output. The superintendent's assistant called me the next day. Mr. Garrison, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention. However, we're now very concerned. If someone is actively tampering with weather monitoring equipment, this could have serious public safety implications. We're going to need to report this to the State Emergency Management Office. I completely understand, I said. I've already filed a police report, and there's an ongoing investigation. Who exactly is responsible for this tampering? My HOA president, Brenda Kowalski. I have video evidence of her replacing my sensors with faulty ones. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Did you say Brenda Kowalski? Yes, why? She's on our community advisory board for weather-related school closures. She's been providing input on severe weather protocols for the past year. My stomach dropped. You're kidding. I wish I was. This just became a much bigger problem. Over the next week, I learned the full extent of what Brenda had done. She joined the school district's weather advisory board about 8 months earlier, positioning herself as a concerned community member who wanted to ensure student safety during severe weather. At the same time, she'd been monitoring my weather station's data feeds and realized that the district was using my station as one of their local data sources. When she couldn't force me to remove my equipment through HOA rules, she decided to discredit it instead. Her plan was elegant in its deviousness. By replacing my sensors with ones that gave false readings, she could make it appear that my equipment was unreliable. Then she could point to the faulty data as justification for removing my station from the district's monitoring network, or perhaps even as evidence to support stronger HOA enforcement actions. What she hadn't counted on was the false sensors being so poorly calibrated that they created obviously wrong data. And she definitely hadn't anticipated that I'd install security cameras and catch her in the act. But the real problem emerged on a Thursday afternoon in late June. Colorado was experiencing unusual weather patterns, with a strong cold front moving through the area earlier than forecasters had predicted. Temperatures were dropping rapidly, and there was potential for severe thunderstorms and possibly hail. I was at work, monitoring the conditions and preparing reports for the evening news when my phone rang. It was Sarah, calling from the hospital where she worked. "Lucas, did you hear that they're closing schools early?" she asked. "What? No, I haven't heard anything about that." "The weather's getting rough, but it's nothing that would warrant early closure." "Well, they just announced it. All Jefferson County schools are releasing students 2 hours early due to dangerous weather conditions." I immediately pulled up the school district's website and saw the announcement. They were citing rapidly deteriorating weather conditions with extreme temperature fluctuations and high risk of severe storms. The decision had been made by the emergency management team based on data from their weather monitoring network. I had a sinking feeling. I pulled up the data from my old weather station, the one with Brenda's false sensors still installed. According to those sensors, the temperature in Maplewood Estates had dropped from 88 degrees to 52 degrees in less than an hour. The barometric pressure showed a dramatic crash. The humidity readings were all over the place. None of it was real. The actual temperature had dropped from 79 to 73 degrees. There was a weather change happening, but nothing extreme or dangerous. But the school district didn't know the sensors were false. They'd seen data suggesting a dramatic and dangerous weather event, and had made the decision to send kids home early. I called the superintendent's office immediately and got through to the assistant I'd spoken with before. "This is Lucas Garrison. The early school closure is based on false data from my compromised weather station. The actual weather conditions don't warrant early release. Mr. Garrison, we've removed your station from our primary monitoring network," she said defensively. "Are you sure?" "Because the decision pattern matches exactly what the false sensors in my backyard are showing. Can you check which data sources were used for this decision?" There was a pause and I could hear typing. Then a longer pause. "Hold on," she said, her voice suddenly tense. I waited for almost 10 minutes before someone else picked up the line. It was Dr. Raymond Foster, the superintendent himself. "Mr. Garrison, we have a problem. It appears that your weather station was not fully removed from our automated monitoring system. The false data you mentioned was included in the algorithm that triggered our early closure protocol. So you're closing schools based on weather that isn't actually happening." "It appears so. However, the decision has already been made and communicated to parents. We can't reverse it now without causing massive confusion and making the district look incompetent." Dr. Foster, with all due respect, continuing with a decision based on false data is worse than admitting a mistake. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to explain this to 30,000 parents and the school board. The person who created this mess is Brenda Kowalski. She's the one who should be explaining it. There was a long silence. "I'll need to consult with our attorneys and board members. In the meantime, can you provide a detailed written statement about exactly what happened and when? I'll send it within the hour." I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. The original HOA dispute, the theft of my sensors, the installation of false sensors, the security footage, and the impact on the school district's data. I included copies of all police reports, emails, and technical documentation showing the discrepancy between the false sensor readings and actual weather conditions. The story broke on the local news that evening, not through my station, but through a competitor who'd gotten wind of the situation. The headline was brutal. HOA president's actions lead to unnecessary school closure based on false weather data. My phone exploded with calls and messages. Other news stations wanted interviews. Parents were furious about having to scramble for childcare. The school board was demanding answers. And somewhere in the middle of all this, the district attorney's office suddenly became very interested in Brenda Kowalski's activities. The police showed up at Brenda's house the next morning with a warrant. Officer Martinez later told me they found my original sensors in her garage, still in a cardboard box. They also found a laptop with detailed notes about my weather station, including the login credentials for my Weather Underground account, which she'd somehow obtained, probably by watching me enter them through my windows with binoculars. Brenda was arrested and charged with theft, criminal trespassing, vandalism, and tampering with public safety infrastructure. That last charge was serious. In Colorado, deliberately interfering with emergency management systems is a felony that can carry up to 6 years in prison. The school district held an emergency board meeting and voted to remove Brenda from the Weather Advisory Board. They also announced a complete review of their weather monitoring protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. The HOA board held their own emergency meeting and asked for Brenda's resignation. She refused, claiming she'd done nothing wrong and was being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards. 2 of her allies on the board stood by her, but the other 2 members had finally had enough. They organized a special election to recall her as president. I attended that meeting, along with about 60 other homeowners who were appalled by what had happened. Brenda stood at the front of the community center meeting room, still clutching her 3-ring binder, trying to explain her actions. "I was simply trying to maintain the integrity and property values of our community," she insisted. "Mr. Garrison's equipment was an eyesore and a liability. Everything I did was in the best interests of Maplewood Estates." "You stole his property," someone shouted from the audience. "I was enforcing HOA regulations," Brenda shot back. "You installed fake weather sensors that caused the schools to close early," another person yelled. "My wife had to leave work and got written up because we couldn't find childcare." "That was an unfortunate side effect of Mr. Garrison's refusal to follow community rules," Brenda said, somehow managing to maintain her composure. "If he'd simply removed his equipment when asked, none of this would have happened." The vote wasn't even close. 73% of homeowners voted to recall her as HOA president. She walked out of the meeting with her head held high, still apparently convinced she'd been in the right. But the legal system wasn't done with her yet. The district attorney's office moved forward with prosecution, and Brenda's case went to trial that September. I testified for 3 hours, explaining the timeline of events, the technical details of the weather equipment, and the impact of her actions on public safety systems. The prosecution brought in an expert witness from the National Weather Service, who explained how personal weather stations contribute to meteorological databases, and how corrupted data can cascade through interconnected systems. He testified that Brenda's actions had affected not just the school district's decisions, but potentially weather forecasts and severe weather warnings throughout the Denver metropolitan area. The defense tried to argue that Brenda had been acting in her capacity as HOA president to enforce legitimate community standards. They portrayed her as an overzealous volunteer who'd made poor decisions but hadn't intended to cause public harm. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted her on all counts after just 4 hours of deliberation. At the sentencing hearing in November, the judge was not sympathetic. "Mrs. Kowalski, you had multiple opportunities to resolve this dispute through legitimate legal channels. Instead, you chose to steal property, trespass, and tamper with safety equipment. Your actions caused unnecessary panic, disrupted the education of thousands of students, and could have had serious consequences if a real weather emergency had occurred while the district's systems were compromised. This court cannot overlook such reckless disregard for public safety." She sentenced Brenda to 2 years in prison, with 1 year suspended, followed by 3 years of probation. Brenda was also ordered to pay restitution to me for the stolen equipment, and to the school district for the costs associated with the premature closure, including compensation to employees who'd been disciplined for leaving work early. The total came to just over $37,000. The civil lawsuits came next. Several parents filed a class action against Brenda for the childcare costs and lost wages from the unnecessary early closure. The school district's insurance company went after her for the reputational damage and costs of implementing new safety protocols. Even the HOA sued her for bringing negative publicity to the community and violating her fiduciary duties as president. By the time everything was settled, Brenda had lost her house in Maplewood Estates, declared bankruptcy, and moved out of state. Her husband, who'd apparently known nothing about her activities, divorced her while she was serving her sentence. As for me, I rebuilt my weather station better than before. The new HOA board, led by a reasonable woman named Patricia Hernandez, actually apologized for the previous board's actions and confirmed in writing that my weather equipment didn't violate any bylaws. They even featured my weather station in the neighborhood newsletter as an example of residents contributing to scientific research. The school district invited me to join their weather advisory board, and I accepted. I worked with their emergency management team to improve their data validation protocols and to add redundancy to their weather monitoring systems. We implemented a system that requires verification from multiple independent sources before triggering early closures or other emergency responses. My station is now one of the most reliable and frequently cited personal weather stations in the Denver area. The National Weather Service actually reached out to congratulate me on maintaining such consistent, high-quality data feeds. Sarah and I still live in Maplewood Estates, though we seriously considered moving during the worst of the ordeal. Our neighbors have been incredibly supportive, and many apologized for not speaking up sooner when Brenda was harassing me about the weather station. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that HOA disputes can escalate far beyond what seems reasonable. I learned that some people become so invested in being right that they'll break the law rather than admit defeat. And I learned that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to document everything and let the legal system do its job. I also learned to install security cameras before problems escalate. Those cameras saved me from what could have been an unsolvable case of he said, she said. Without video evidence, I might never have proven that Brenda was responsible for the theft and sensor replacement. The meteorological community rallied around me in ways I never expected. I received emails from weather enthusiasts all over the country who'd had similar problems with HOAs and property disputes. Several professional organizations, including the American Meteorological Society, issued statements supporting homeowners' rights to maintain personal weather stations and contributing to scientific databases. Some states, inspired by my case, have even proposed legislation protecting personal weather stations from HOA interference. Colorado passed such a law in early 2025, explicitly stating that HOAs cannot prohibit weather monitoring equipment that meets certain reasonable criteria regarding placement and maintenance. The school district's experience became a case study in emergency management programs across the country. Dr. Foster, the superintendent, actually presented about the incident at a national conference on school safety, using it as an example of the importance of data validation and redundancy in automated emergency response systems. As for Brenda, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she tried to get involved in her new HOA in Arizona, but word of her criminal conviction spread quickly. Apparently, HOA boards are reluctant to appoint convicted felons to leadership positions, especially when the conviction involves abusing HOA authority. Who would have thought? I occasionally check in with Officer Martinez, who's moved on to other cases but still remembers mine as one of the stranger property crimes he's investigated. He told me that he now includes my case as an example when training new officers about documenting evidence and taking property crimes seriously, even when they seem minor or unusual at first glance. The whole experience took about 14 months from the first day Brenda showed up at my door to the final sentencing hearing. It consumed countless hours, caused enormous stress, and cost me thousands of dollars even after the restitution payments. But in the end, justice was served and positive changes came out of a bad situation. My weather station stands as a small victory for reason over petness, for science over aesthetics, and for homeowners' rights over HOA overreach. Every time I check my temperature readings and see accurate data flowing to forecasters and researchers across the region, I feel a sense of satisfaction. Not just because I won the dispute, but because I'm contributing something valuable to my community and to meteorological science. And every time I see Brenda's empty house, which sat on the market for months before finally selling at a loss, I'm reminded that actions have consequences. She could have accepted a reasonable compromise. She could have respected my property rights. She could have worked with me instead of against me. Instead, she chose to wage war over a weather station, and she lost everything. Sarah and I sometimes talk about the whole ordeal late at night when we're sitting on our back porch, looking at my weather station silhouetted against the Colorado sky. She asks me if I ever regret not just taking down the equipment and avoiding the whole mess. I tell her the same thing every time. Principles matter. If we let bullies win because fighting back is inconvenient or expensive, then we're teaching them that bullying works. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Plus, I really love my weather station. The neighborhood has moved on from the drama. We have new families moving in, attracted by the homes that opened up when several of Brenda's close friends decided to relocate to other communities. The new residents are younger, more diverse, and generally more relaxed about things like weather equipment and personal property choices. Patricia, the new HOA president, has implemented a more collaborative approach to community management. Instead of sending violation notices for every minor aesthetic concern, she encourages neighbors to talk to each other and find mutually acceptable solutions. The HOA board now requires a 2/3 majority vote before taking enforcement action against any homeowner, preventing the kind of personal vendetta that Brenda waged against me. I've even started teaching a community education class on weather science and personal weather stations. About a dozen neighbors attended the first session, and several expressed interest in setting up their own monitoring equipment. I help them choose appropriate equipment for their interests and budgets, and I show them how to contribute their data to scientific databases. There's a certain irony in the fact that Brenda's attempt to eliminate one weather station from the neighborhood resulted in multiple weather stations being installed by inspired residents. The Maplewood Estates area is now one of the best monitored microclimates in the Denver metro region. My boss at the news station has asked me to do occasional segments about personal weather monitoring and citizen science. I've become something of a local expert on the intersection of technology, property rights, and community disputes. It's not the kind of fame I ever sought, but it's been interesting and has led to some unexpected opportunities. The district attorney who prosecuted Brenda's case, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, told me afterwards that she'd been looking for a high-profile case to highlight the importance of protecting scientific data and public safety infrastructure. My situation gave her exactly what she needed. She's since been appointed to a state task force on cybersecurity and data integrity, where she's working on legislation to protect various types of monitoring and data collection systems from tampering. I testified before that task force last spring, providing the perspective of someone who'd experienced firsthand how data corruption can cascade through interconnected systems. My testimony helped inform new guidelines for school districts and emergency management agencies across Colorado regarding data validation and source verification. The technical aspects of what Brenda did have become a teaching example in meteorology and data science courses. I've been invited to speak at several universities about the importance of data integrity and the potential consequences of corrupted information in automated decision-making systems. College students are often shocked that someone would deliberately sabotage weather data, but it opens important discussions about data security and validation. My original stolen sensors were eventually returned to me after serving as evidence in the trial. They're not particularly valuable, and I'd already replaced them, but I kept them as a reminder of the whole experience. They sit on a shelf in my home office, labeled with a small plaque that Sarah made for me as a joke. Evidence of insanity. The false sensors that Brenda installed disappeared into the evidence system, and as far as I know, were never returned. I don't particularly want them anyway. They were cheap knockoffs designed to look like real sensors, but with inaccurate components. An expert witness at the trial estimated they probably cost less than $50 total to manufacture. Brenda spent enormous amounts of time and energy, risked her freedom and reputation, and ultimately destroyed her life over $50 worth of fake sensors and a misguided obsession with neighborhood aesthetics. When I think about it in those terms, it seems even more absurd. If she'd spent a fraction of the effort trying to work with me instead of against me, we could have found a solution that satisfied everyone. I would have been happy to adjust the appearance of my equipment or relocate components to be less visible. I offered those compromises multiple times, but Brenda wasn't interested in compromise. She wanted complete surrender. That's the thing about people like Brenda. It's not really about the stated issue, whether that's a weather station, a fence color, or a mailbox style. It's about control and power. Being HOA president gave Brenda a small amount of authority, and she wielded it like a weapon against anyone who didn't immediately comply with her demands. She enjoyed the power more than she cared about the actual outcomes. I've talked to other people who have had similar experiences with HOA board members who abuse their authority. There's a whole subculture of homeowners who have fought back against unreasonable HOA rules and leaders. Some of those battles have been even more extreme than mine, involving foreclosures, liens, and years of legal warfare. It's made me think carefully about HOAs and their role in American communities. On one hand, they can provide valuable services and help maintain property values. On the other hand, they concentrate power in the hands of volunteers who may not have the temperament, judgment, or training to exercise that power responsibly. When the system works well, it's barely noticeable. When it fails, it can destroy lives and tear apart communities. I've become an advocate for HOA reform, particularly regarding transparency, accountability, and limits on enforcement authority. I've testified before the Colorado legislature about the need for better oversight of HOAs and stronger protections for homeowner rights. Some of that testimony drew directly from my experience with Brenda and the weather station dispute. Colorado now has stronger laws requiring HOAs to follow specific procedures before taking enforcement action, including mandatory mediation for disputes and stricter rules about what kinds of restrictions HOAs can impose. These reforms won't prevent all abuses, but they should make it harder for future Brendas to weaponize HOA authority against residents they don't like. My relationship with Weather Underground and other meteorological databases has grown stronger through all of this. They've implemented better security protocols for personal weather stations, including verification systems that can detect when data seems inconsistent with nearby stations. If my situation had occurred a few years later, their systems might have automatically flagged the false data before it caused problems. The Jefferson County School District completely overhauled their weather monitoring and emergency decision-making processes. They now require human verification of any automated alerts and maintain relationships with multiple independent weather data sources, including the National Weather Service, local news stations, and several vetted personal weather station operators. The superintendent told me that the premature school closure, while embarrassing at the time, ultimately led to a much more robust and reliable system that better protects students. Sarah was remarkably patient and supportive throughout the entire ordeal. She never once suggested that I should just give up or remove the weather station to avoid the conflict. She attended court hearings with me, helped me organize documentation, and generally kept me sane during the most stressful periods. I don't know how I would have gotten through it without her support. We celebrated the end of the legal proceedings with a vacation to Hawaii, where I resisted the urge to analyze the local weather patterns too obsessively. Though I did notice that Maui has excellent weather monitoring infrastructure, and I may have spent one afternoon visiting a National Weather Service office there. Sarah rolled her eyes but humored me. These days, life in Maplewood Estates is peaceful. My weather station continues operating flawlessly, providing data to forecasters, researchers, and anyone else who finds it useful. The neighborhood has accepted it as part of the local character, and several residents now point it out to visitors as a conversation piece. I've had inquiries from several production companies about turning my story into a documentary or even a dramatized television episode. I've declined most of these offers, though I did cooperate with a journalist who wrote a long-form article about HOA overreach that appeared in a national magazine. The article used my case as a centerpiece, but also explored similar situations across the country. The article generated a lot of discussion, and apparently inspired several state legislatures to examine their HOA regulations more closely. I received dozens of emails from people thanking me for standing up to my HOA and sharing their own horror stories about neighborhood association disputes. Some of those stories made my experience look almost tame by comparison. I've learned that there's an entire subset of attorneys who specialize in HOA law, both representing associations and homeowners. It's a more complex area of law than I ever realized, involving property rights, contract law, constitutional issues, and increasingly First Amendment and scientific freedom concerns. My case has been cited in several subsequent legal battles involving homeowners' rights to install solar panels, satellite dishes, and other equipment that HOAs attempted to prohibit. The criminal conviction of an HOA board member for actions taken in their official capacity was relatively rare, which is why my case attracted so much attention. Many HOA disputes are handled through civil courts, with fines and liens rather than criminal prosecution. But Brenda's actions crossed the line from overzealous rule enforcement into criminal behavior, particularly when she interfered with public safety systems. I sometimes wonder what Brenda thinks about now, whether she has any regrets, or whether she still believes she was justified in her actions. I hope she's learned something from the experience, but I'm not particularly optimistic. People who are that invested in being right rarely engage in meaningful self-reflection. The house she used to live in was purchased by a young couple with 2 kids. They're friendly and normal, and they've even asked me for advice about installing their own weather monitoring equipment. I helped them set up a basic system, nowhere near as elaborate as mine, but sufficient for their interest in tracking local conditions. The irony of Brenda's old house having weather equipment in its yard makes me smile every time I think about it. My career has benefited from the whole experience in unexpected ways. I've been promoted to senior meteorologist at the station, partly based on my regular work, but also because of the positive publicity from standing up for scientific integrity. The station has featured my story several times during sweeps periods, always framing it as a human interest piece about citizen science and standing up for principles. I've been invited to speak at professional conferences about the incident and its broader implications for meteorology and citizen science. My presentations focus on the importance of protecting independent data collection, the vulnerability of interconnected automated systems to corrupted data, and the need for robust validation protocols. These are fairly dry technical topics, but when I frame them through the story of an HOA president stealing sensors and causing schools to close, audiences stay engaged. The National Weather Service presented me with a commendation for my contributions to meteorological data and for bringing attention to the importance of personal weather stations in the National Observation Network. It's a certificate suitable for framing, and it now hangs in my office next to my degrees and professional licenses. I've maintained the police report and all the documentation from the case, not because I expect to need it again, but because it represents something important. It's evidence that standing up to bullies and fighting for what's right can actually work, even when the odds seem stacked against you. It's proof that the legal system, while slow and imperfect, can deliver justice when you have facts and evidence on your side. Officer Martinez sometimes drops by the house when he's patrolling the neighborhood. We've become friendly, bonding over the shared experience of the investigation. He tells me that the case is now used as a training example for new officers about the importance of taking all property crimes seriously and thoroughly documenting evidence, even when cases seem minor or unusual. The whole experience has made me more aware of my community and more engaged in local governance. I attend HOA meetings regularly now, not because I distrust the new board, but because I believe homeowners have a responsibility to stay informed and involved. Patricia runs efficient, transparent meetings that focus on actual community needs rather than petty aesthetic concerns. Several of the restrictive rules that Brenda had championed were repealed or modified by the new board. The bylaws were updated to be more specific and reasonable, with clear definitions and appeal processes. The new rules protect homeowners' reasonable use of their property while still maintaining basic community standards. I've become something of an informal advisor to the HOA board on technical matters. When questions come up about solar panels, satellite dishes, or other equipment, they ask for my input on finding solutions that balance community aesthetics with homeowners' rights and needs. It's a role I never expected to have, but it's been rewarding to help prevent future conflicts. The financial impact of the whole ordeal was significant, even with the eventual restitution payments. Legal fees, replacement equipment, time off work for court appearances, and general stress all took their toll. But Sarah and I agreed that some things are worth fighting for, and this was one of them. We're comfortable enough financially that we could absorb the costs. though I know many homeowners in similar situations don't have that luxury. That's one reason I try to help others who are facing HOA disputes. I've provided advice and support to several people who have reached out after hearing my story. Sometimes just knowing that someone else successfully fought back against an unreasonable HOA gives people the courage to stand up for their own rights. I've been careful not to let the whole experience make me bitter or paranoid. It would be easy to become that person who sees conspiracies everywhere and trusts no one. Instead, I've tried to use it as a learning experience that makes me more aware and prepared, but doesn't consume my life with negativity. My weather station continues to be a source of joy and professional satisfaction. Every time I see accurate data flowing from my sensors to forecasting systems across the region, I feel like I'm contributing something valuable. The equipment represents not just a hobby or a professional tool, but a small victory for science, reason, and individual rights. The students whose school was dismissed early have all moved on, most of them probably not even remembering the incident. For them, it was just an unexpected early dismissal, a brief disruption in their routine. Only their parents and the school administrators understood the deeper implications and the problems caused by Brenda's actions. I hope the incident serves as a lasting reminder to the school district and other emergency management agencies about the importance of data validation and source verification. In an age where we rely increasingly on automated systems and interconnected data sources, the integrity of that data becomes critical. One corrupted source can cascade through multiple systems, causing decisions that affect thousands of people. The whole experience has given me a deeper appreciation for the complexity of modern systems and the importance of redundancy and verification. It's also given me a healthy skepticism about any single data source, no matter how reliable it seems. Cross-checking and verification aren't just good practices. They're essential safeguards against errors, whether those errors are accidental or deliberate. Looking back now, almost 2 years after Brenda first appeared at my door with her 3-ring binder, I can see the experience more philosophically. It was a conflict that neither of us wanted, though we both handled it very differently. I tried to find reasonable compromises and work within the system. She decided to break the law and manipulate data to force the outcome she wanted. In the end, the truth came out, justice was served, and positive changes emerged from a negative situation. That's probably the best outcome anyone could have hoped for, though I would have preferred to avoid the whole mess entirely. My weather station still stands in my backyard, its sensors accurately measuring temperature, humidity, pressure, wind speed, and precipitation. The data flows continuously to databases and forecasting systems, contributing to weather predictions and scientific research. It's doing exactly what I designed it to do, what I always wanted it to do. And every time I look at it, I'm reminded that sometimes the smallest things, a few sensors on poles in a backyard, can become the center of much larger conflicts about rights, rules, power, and principle. I'm glad I fought for my right to maintain that equipment. I'm glad I documented everything and pursued justice. And I'm especially glad that Brenda's attempt to eliminate my weather station ultimately failed, while her own career as an HOA tyrant came to a definitive end. The weather continues, indifferent to human drama and conflicts. My station continues to monitor it, accurately and reliably, contributing data that helps forecasters and researchers better understand our atmosphere. And I continue to live in Maplewood Estates, at peace with my neighbors and my equipment, with a much better understanding of both HOA politics and the importance of standing up for what's right. Life has returned to normal, or as normal as it can be after you've been through a legal battle that made headlines and changed state laws. I check my weather station every morning, just like I did before Brenda entered my life. The readings are accurate, the data is clean, and the system works exactly as it should. That's all I ever wanted.